The morning sun shone through the tall windows of classroom Delta 7 at Galactic University. Students from 12 different worlds sat in curved rows, waiting for their professor to arrive. The air smelled like metal and cleaning chemicals, mixed with the strange scents that came from having so many different species in one room. Day sat in the back corner, his backpack on the floor beside him. He was the only human in advanced survival studies, and he felt it every day. The other students were bigger, stronger, or had special abilities that made them perfect hunters. Day was just 22 years old, studying engineering and taking this class because he needed the credits to graduate. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Professor Veltic walked in on 6 thick legs, his reptilian body covered in dark green scales that changed color when he moved. His 3 pairs of eyes looked around the room, studying each student carefully. Behind him walked his assistant, a small floating robot that carried his teaching materials. "Good morning, class," Professor Veltic said in his deep, rumbling voice. His forked tongue flicked out as he spoke, tasting the air. "Today we discuss your final examination." An excited buzz went through the classroom. The insectoid student named Crix rubbed his front legs together, making a scratching sound. His black shell reflected the ceiling lights, and his compound eyes focused on the professor. Next to him, Mordan shifted in his special water-filled seat. The aquatic being's tentacles moved slowly through the liquid, and his gills fluttered with excitement. In the middle row, Zeph's energy form glowed brighter for a moment. The being looked like a person made of yellow light, constantly shifting and moving. When Zeph got excited, he became brighter like a lamp being turned up. "Your final test begins tomorrow at sunrise," Professor Veltic continued. His scales shifted from dark green to brown as he spoke. "You will spend 72 hours in Wilderness Preserve 7. Your task is simple: hunt and capture enough protein to keep yourself alive for 3 full days." You, a female student from the crystal-based shard species, raised one of her sharp, glowing arms. "Professor, are we allowed to work together?" "No," Veltic replied firmly. "This is an individual test. You must survive alone, using only your natural abilities and basic tools provided in your emergency kit." Day felt his stomach drop. The emergency kit contained simple items: a knife, some rope, a water bottle, and a small first aid pack. Nothing that would help him compete with students who had built-in weapons and hunting instincts. Crix clicked his mandibles together happily. Finally, a real challenge. The insectoid student was nearly 2 meters tall, with 4 arms ending in sharp claws. His mandibles could cut through metal, and his compound eyes could see movement from great distances. For Crix, hunting was as natural as breathing. "Easy points," agreed Tor, a massive student from a warrior species. His thick, fur-covered body was built for strength and speed. His claws were as long as Day's fingers, and his teeth were sharp enough to tear through armor. Tor had been top student in every combat class. Mordan made a bubbling sound that Day knew was laughter. "The lake will provide everything I need," the aquatic being said through his translator device. Mordan could breathe underwater and had natural sonar to find fish. His tentacles could grab multiple prey at once. Professor Veltic nodded approvingly at his student's confidence. Then his 6 eyes focused on Day sitting quietly in the back. "Ah yes, our human student. Day, you understand this will be particularly challenging for your species?" All heads turned toward Day. He felt heat rise in his cheeks as 24 alien eyes stared at him. Some looked curious, others seemed sorry for him, and a few appeared amused. "Humans have no natural hunting advantages," Professor Veltic explained to the class, like Day was not even there. "No claws, no fangs, no venom. Your eyesight is poor compared to most species. Your sense of smell is weak. You cannot run very fast or climb very well. You have no camouflage ability." Sun, a female student with blue, scaly skin, made a sympathetic cooing sound. "Poor Day. Maybe the professor will give you extra time? Or easier prey to catch?" suggested another student. Professor Veltic's scales turned darker. "There will be no special treatment. All students face the same challenge with the same rules. Natural selection does not make exceptions." Day finally spoke up, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I understand, Professor. No special treatment needed." Several students exchanged glances. They whispered among themselves in their various languages, but Day caught enough words through the universal translators to know they were discussing his chances of passing. Most did not think he would survive the full 72 hours. "Very well," Professor Veltic said. "Transportation to the preserve leaves at dawn tomorrow. Bring only your emergency kit and the clothes you are wearing. The preserve contains various herbivores, some small predators and adequate water sources. Weather will be mild with some rain expected on day 2. He paused and looked directly at Day again. I should mention that this preserve has hosted this examination for 50 years. No human has ever achieved a passing grade. Most are rescued on day 2 due to hunger and exhaustion. The classroom fell silent. Even the usual background noises of different species breathing, clicking, or humming stopped. Everyone stared at Day, waiting for his reaction. Day sat quietly for a moment, then smiled and opened his notebook. What time should we report tomorrow morning, Professor? Professor Veltic's scales rippled with what might have been surprise. Transport leaves at 6 a.m. sharp. Do not be late. As class ended and students filed out, many stopped to speak with Day. Some offered advice, others expressed sympathy, and a few suggested he might want to drop the class and take it again next year with better preparation. Day thanked them all politely, packed his books, and walked toward the library. He had research to do and plans to make. Tomorrow would be interesting. The morning air felt cold against Day's face as he stepped off the transport ship. Wilderness Preserve 7 stretched before him like a green ocean. Tall trees rose up toward the sky, their branches thick with leaves. In the distance he could hear running water and strange animal calls. 24 students stood in a line while Professor Veltic checked their emergency kits. The morning sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky orange and pink. Day looked around at his classmates, noting how excited and confident they seemed. Remember, Professor Veltic announced, his scales bright green in the morning light, you have exactly 72 hours. Monitoring drones will track your vital signs for safety, but will not help you hunt. Good luck. A loud horn sounded. Immediately, most students charged into the forest like they were racing. Crix shot forward on his powerful legs, his compound eyes already scanning for prey. Tor bounded ahead, following a scent trail with his nose close to the ground. Zeph's glowing form moved quickly between the trees, looking for small animals to drain energy from. Mordan headed straight for the lake that Day could see shining through the trees. The aquatic student dove in with a huge splash, disappearing beneath the water to hunt fish with his natural sonar. Several flying students took to the air immediately, using their height advantage to spot prey from above. Others used camouflage abilities to blend with their surroundings and wait for animals to come close. Day watched them all disappear into the forest. In less than 5 minutes he was alone at the landing site. The transport ship had already left, and only the sound of wind in the trees remained. He pulled out a small notebook and pencil from his emergency kit. While his classmates were already chasing their first targets, Day sat on a fallen log and began to write. He divided his page into sections: water sources, animal signs, terrain features, and weather patterns. For the next 2 hours, Day walked slowly through the forest. He was not hunting. He was learning. Every few minutes he stopped to write notes or make small drawings in his notebook. Near a stream he found fresh hoof prints in the soft mud. The prints were small and round, made by some kind of herbivore. He followed them for a short distance and discovered they led to a natural clearing where the grass was short and sweet. Bite marks on the grass showed that animals came here to feed regularly. Day noted the location on his rough map. He also noticed that the animals seemed to follow the same path every time, a narrow trail between 2 large rocks that led from the forest to the feeding area. At another spot he found a tree with scratch marks on the bark. The marks were fresh, made by claws about the size of his hand. Small tufts of brown fur stuck to the rough bark. He wrote down these details and marked the location. By noon, while his classmates were deep in active hunts, Day had mapped 3 water sources, identified 4 different animal trails, and located 5 feeding areas. He had not tried to catch a single animal yet. In the distance he could hear the sounds of other students hunting. Crix's clicking echoed through the forest as he chased something. Tor's deep roar suggested he had found prey but perhaps lost it. Splashing from the lake told him that Mordan was actively fishing. Day found a good spot near the main stream and unpacked his emergency kit completely. He had a knife, 30 meters of strong rope, a metal water bottle, some basic medical supplies and emergency food tablets that would last 1 day if he was really desperate. Instead of eating the emergency food, Day began to work. He used his knife to cut thin, flexible branches from nearby trees. His hands moved carefully and precisely, like he was building something in his engineering lab back at the university. He tied small loops in his rope, testing the knots multiple times to make sure they were strong. Then he began setting these rope snares along the animal trail he had discovered earlier. He placed them at exactly the right height, based on the hoof prints he had measured. The first snare went between two trees where the trail was narrowest. Animals would have to pass through this spot to reach their feeding ground. The second snare was placed near the water, where he had seen many different types of tracks in the mud. Day worked steadily through the afternoon. He dug a shallow pit along another animal trail, using a flat rock as a shovel. The pit was not deep enough to hurt an animal, just deep enough to trap it temporarily. He covered the pit with thin branches and leaves, making it look like solid ground. Near the stream he built what his grandfather had once shown him, a fish trap made from woven grass and small sticks. The trap was shaped like a funnel, with a wide opening that led to a narrow space where fish could swim in but not out. He placed it in the shallow water where he had seen fish swimming earlier. As the sun began to set, Day heard his classmates returning to areas near the starting point. Some sounded frustrated. He caught glimpses of crickets through the trees, moving more slowly now, his earlier excitement gone. Tor's roaring had stopped, replaced by heavy breathing that suggested exhaustion. Day finished his 15th trap as darkness fell. He had worked for 8 straight hours without stopping to rest or eat. His hands were dirty and scratched from handling branches and rope, but he felt satisfied with his progress. He made a small, smokeless fire using dry wood and ate a handful of edible berries he had identified during his morning walk. Then he found a sheltered spot between 2 large tree roots and settled down to sleep. Around him, his traps waited silently in the darkness, working while he rested. Tomorrow would show if his engineering approach could compete with natural hunting instincts. Day woke up as the first light touched the forest. His body felt stiff from sleeping on the ground, but he was not hungry. The handful of berries from last night had been enough. More importantly, he had slept well while his traps worked through the darkness. He rolled up his makeshift blanket made from large leaves and began walking his trap line. The forest was quiet in the early morning, with only bird calls and the sound of his footsteps on the soft ground. At his first snare, Day stopped and stared. A small, rabbit-like creature with 6 legs hung in the rope loop, already dead. The animal was about the size of a house cat, with thick brown fur and long ears. It would provide enough meat for 2 full meals. The second snare was empty, but the third one held 2 smaller creatures that looked like squirrels but with longer tails. They had triggered the snare sometime during the night while traveling together. Day felt his heart beat faster with excitement, but he kept his expression calm. He carefully removed the animals from the snares and reset the traps exactly as they had been. Then he continued to his pit trap. Inside the shallow hole, a deer-like animal with 4 legs and spotted fur stood looking up at him. It was not hurt, just trapped and confused. The animal was much larger than what he had caught in the snares, enough meat to feed him for several days. Using his rope, Day carefully pulled the animal out of the pit and quickly ended its life with his knife. He felt bad about killing it, but this was survival. He covered the pit trap again and moved on to check his fish trap. The funnel trap in the stream had worked perfectly. 6 fish swam in the narrow end, unable to find their way out. They were each about the length of his hand, with silver scales that flashed in the morning sunlight. By the time the sun was fully up, Day had collected more protein than he could eat in 2 days. He had not expended any energy chasing prey or fighting. The traps had done all the work while he slept. In the distance, he could hear other students beginning their second day of hunting. But the sounds were different from yesterday. Less excited, more frustrated. Crickets' clicking had become irregular and desperate. Someone was roaring angrily, probably Tor having trouble finding fresh prey. Day understood what was happening. On the first day, the animals in the preserve had been curious and unafraid. But after being chased by 24 alien predators for 12 hours, the surviving animals had become scared and careful. They were hiding deeper in the forest, avoiding the areas where they normally fed and drank. This made traditional hunting much harder. But it did not affect Day's traps at all. Scared animals still needed water and food. They still used the same trails their species had used for generations. They just moved more carefully and mostly at night, which was exactly when Day's traps were working. He carried his catch to a safe spot near the stream and began to process the meat. Using his knife, he carefully skinned and cleaned each animal. He had learned these skills from his grandfather during summer visits to the family farm back on Earth. Day built a proper smoking rack using green wood that would not burn easily. He cut the meat into thin strips and hung them over a low fire that produced lots of smoke but little flame. The smoke would preserve the meat and keep it safe to eat for many days. While the meat smoked, he cleaned and prepared the fish. Some he would eat fresh today, but others he cut into strips to smoke alongside the larger game. He also gathered salt from dried areas near the stream to help preserve his food. By midday, delicious smells filled his small camp. The smoking meat was turning dark brown and developing the tough texture that meant it would last without spoiling. Day tried a small piece and smiled. It tasted good and would provide excellent nutrition. He could hear his classmates moving through the forest around him, but they sounded tired and frustrated. Through the trees, he glimpsed Crix moving slowly, his compound eyes scanning desperately for any sign of prey. The insectoid student's confident clicking from yesterday had become quiet whimpers. Zeph's bright energy form flickered past in the distance, much dimmer than usual. The energy being needed to drain life force from other creatures to maintain his brightness, but the animals were now avoiding him completely. From the lake came angry splashing sounds. Mordan was having trouble finding fish. The aquatic student had probably caught most of the easy prey yesterday, and the remaining fish had moved to deeper, harder-to-reach areas. Late in the afternoon, Day heard voices getting closer to his camp. 2 students were walking nearby, talking in tired voices about their lack of success. He recognized Sun's voice and another student named Kai from the insect-like species. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning," Sun was saying. "The animals are all gone." "Not gone," Kai replied. "Just hiding. My natural camouflage is useless if there are no animals to ambush." Day continued working quietly, turning his meat strips and tending his smoking fire. His food stores were growing larger every hour. He had enough protein to feed himself for a week, and it was only the second day of the test. As evening approached, he reset all his traps and built a better shelter for the night. Tomorrow he would check his trap line again, and if his success continued, he would soon have more food than one person could possibly eat. The sounds of hungry, frustrated students echoed through the forest as darkness fell. The third morning brought heavy clouds and the smell of rain in the air. Professor Veltic arrived early in his hover vehicle, accompanied by 3 monitoring drones that had been tracking student vital signs throughout the test. The professor's scales had turned a worried shade of gray-green. His assistant robot floated beside him, displaying data on student health and stress levels. Most readings showed signs of hunger, exhaustion, and frustration. But one signal was different: calm, well-fed, and rested. "This cannot be correct," Professor Veltic muttered, checking the readings again. Student Day shows no signs of hunger or stress. The human should be the weakest performer. The professor directed his hover vehicle toward the strange readings. As he flew over the forest canopy, his 6 eyes scanned the ground below. Most areas showed no signs of student activity. The animals had learned to avoid the places where they had been hunted for 2 days. Then he saw smoke rising from a clearing near the mainstream. Not the thin, desperate smoke of someone trying to stay warm, but thick, steady smoke from a well-maintained fire. Professor Veltic landed his vehicle at the edge of the clearing and stepped out. What he found made his scales shift rapidly through several colors of confusion and disbelief. Day sat comfortably beside a proper smoking rack filled with strips of preserved meat. Neat piles of processed food covered a raised platform made from branches and leaves. Several containers held clean water. A well-built shelter stood against 2 large trees, with a waterproof roof made from woven leaves. The human looked clean and healthy. His clothes were dirty from 3 days of work, but he showed no signs of hunger or exhaustion. He was calmly tending his fire and turning meat strips to ensure even smoking. "Good morning, Professor," Day said politely, looking up from his work. "The weather looks like rain today." Professor Veltic stared at the abundant food stores. "Impossible," he whispered. "How did you acquire so much protein? Did you break the rules? Did you work with other students?" Before Day could answer, crashing sounds came from the forest. Crix stumbled into the clearing, his black shell now dull and scratched. The insectoid student's compound eyes focused weakly on the scene before him. His mandibles clicked slowly with confusion. "Food," Crix whispered. "I smell meat." Behind Crix, other students began arriving. Tor dragged himself between the trees, his thick fur matted and dirty. The warrior species student who had been so confident 2 days ago now looked thin and tired. His sharp claws, so perfect for hunting, had found no prey to catch. Mordan's tentacles barely moved as he approached from the direction of the lake. The aquatic student's natural sonar had become useless as fish learned to hide in the deepest parts of the water. His translator device crackled weakly when he tried to speak. Zeph's energy form flickered like a dying light bulb. The being who had glowed so brightly on the first day now looked pale and transparent. Without life energy to drain from other creatures, Zeph was slowly fading away. Sun crawled out from behind a fallen log, her blue scales turned almost gray with hunger. Kai followed, his natural camouflage failing as his body weakened. One by one, more students arrived, all showing signs of severe hunger and exhaustion. They stood at the edge of Day's camp, staring at the impossible sight before them. The human, the weakest student, the one they had pitied, sat surrounded by more food than any of them had seen in 3 days. "I do not understand," Professor Veltic said slowly. "Humans have no hunting advantages. Your species lacks all the necessary physical adaptations." Day looked around at his hungry classmates. Some could barely stand. Others stared at his food with desperate eyes but were too proud to ask for help. These were students from warrior species, natural predators, beings evolved for hunting. And they were starving while he had plenty. "There is enough food here for everyone," Day said quietly. "Please eat." The silence stretched for long seconds. Crix's mandibles clicked once in disbelief. Tor's nose twitched as he smelled the preserved meat, but his pride held him back. These were apex predators from their home worlds. How could they accept food from a human? Sun was the first to move. The blue-scaled student took one step forward, then another. "Day," she said in a weak voice, could I have just a small piece?" Day immediately stood up and selected some of his best smoked meat. He handed it to Sun with a gentle smile. "Of course. Take as much as you need." Sun ate quickly, her eyes closing with relief as real food filled her empty stomach. The other students watched her gain strength and color. One by one they began to approach. Crix accepted a large piece of meat with shaking mandibles. Tor took several strips and ate them without speaking. Mordan carefully consumed fish that Day had prepared specially for aquatic species. Even Zeph was able to absorb some life energy from the fresh meat. Professor Veltic watched in amazement as the weakest student in his class fed every other member. The human had not only survived, he had thrived while natural-born hunters starved around him. "How?" the professor finally asked. "How did you accomplish this when every superior species failed?" Day looked around at his eating classmates, then at his professor. "I did not hunt the way they did," he said simply. "I used a different approach." Professor Veltic's scales shifted through several shades of confusion as he watched his students eat. The monitoring drones circled overhead, recording everything for the university records. Never in 50 years of teaching this course had he seen anything like this scene. "Explain your methods," the professor said, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Show me how a species without hunting adaptations achieved such results." Day finished handing out portions to the last hungry students, then sat down on a fallen log. His classmates gathered around him, no longer looking at him with pity or amusement. Their eyes showed respect and confusion. "On the first day, while everyone was chasing individual animals, I spent time learning," Day began. "I mapped the area, found water sources, and studied animal behavior patterns. I discovered where they ate, where they drank, and which paths they used to travel." Crix clicked his mandibles softly. "But that was wasted time. You should have been hunting while the prey was still easy to catch." "That is where we think differently," Day replied. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters. On my home world, early humans would chase one animal for hours or even days. We could not run as fast as our prey, but we could run longer. We would follow the same animal until it collapsed from exhaustion." Sun wiped juice from the smoked meat off her blue scales. "But you did not chase anything. You just waited." "Exactly," Day said with a smile. "I used traps instead of my legs, but the idea was the same. Humans learned that sometimes the best way to catch prey is to let it catch itself." He stood up and walked to the edge of his camp, gesturing for everyone to follow. "Come, I will show you." Day led the group to his nearest snare, carefully explaining how it worked. "Animals use the same trails every day. They have used these paths for thousands of years. I simply put my traps where the animals would naturally walk." Professor Veltic examined the simple rope snare with growing amazement. "This requires no strength, no speed, no special senses. Just knowledge and planning." "And patience," Day added. "Each trap I made could work for many hours without me being there. While I slept, my traps were hunting. While I built more traps, the first ones were catching prey. They walked to the pit trap next. Even empty, its clever design was clear. The hole was just deep enough to hold an animal without hurting it, covered perfectly to look like normal ground." Tor sniffed around the edges of the pit. "My species would never think to dig holes. We use our strength and speed to chase prey directly. And that works well when prey is plentiful and unafraid," Day said. "But after the first day, the animals learned to fear hunters. They hid during the day and moved only at night. Direct hunting became almost impossible." Mordan's tentacles moved slowly through the air as he spoke through his translator. The fish fled to deep water where my sonar could not reach them effectively. But animals still needed food and water, Day continued. They still had to use these trails to survive. My traps worked just as well with scared animals as with calm ones. They walked to the stream where Day showed them his fish trap. The woven funnel design was simple but effective. Fish could swim in easily but could not find their way out. Zeph's energy form flickered brighter as he absorbed more life force from the food he had eaten. Your traps required no energy from you once they were built. That is the key, Day said. Instead of spending energy hunting each day, I spent energy once to build systems that hunted for me. Then I used my saved energy to build more traps, preserve food, and improve my shelter. Professor Veltic was taking detailed notes on his electronic pad. What about the food preservation? Most species eat their kills immediately. Humans learn to plan for the future, Day explained, leading them back to his smoking rack. We preserve food when it is available so we have supplies when hunting is difficult. Smoking, drying, salting, these are old human techniques. He pointed to his organized food stores. I caught more than I could eat so I preserved the extra. When other species might starve during bad hunting days, humans survived on stored food. Kai adjusted his natural camouflage, which was working better now that he had eaten. But why share your food with us? We are your competition. Day looked surprised by the question. Humans are social creatures. We survived by working together, not by competing alone. When one human had extra food, they shared it with their tribe. Everyone benefited. Fascinating, Professor Veltic muttered, his scales now bright green with excitement. You approached this as a resource management problem rather than a hunting challenge. Exactly, Day said. The assignment was to gather enough protein to survive for 3 days. It did not require me to hunt in any particular way. Sun stretched her newly strengthened limbs. Day, could you teach us these human techniques? I want to learn about traps and food preservation. And planning methods, added Crix. My species focuses on immediate action, but long-term thinking seems very useful. More students began asking questions about human survival strategies. Professor Veltic watched with interest as his class dynamic completely changed. The human student they had pitted was now their teacher. I will restructure this course, the professor announced. We have focused too much on natural hunting abilities and not enough on intelligence-based survival strategies. As the rain began to fall, Day invited everyone to share his shelter. 24 students from different worlds sat together, eating human-prepared food and learning about persistence, planning, and cooperation. Professor Veltic made a final note in his records. Human students should not be considered disadvantaged. They simply use advantages that other species do not recognize. The test ended with every student well-fed and safe, thanks to methods that had kept humans alive for millions of years.